hi everyone. My name is Megan McNamara. I'm the founder of Fantastic Fertility, and basically I'm a fertility awareness educator. I teach people the fertility awareness method, the symptothermal method, for natural birth control and also for health charting.
Amazing. Yeah. So you were talking a little bit about how using biomarkers like your basal temperature, so your body's resting temperature, and cervical mucus can be really powerful in understanding your cycle and what's going on with not only your fertility, but everything else in our body and other health symptoms.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, I can definitely get into that. So basically with fertility awareness, what it is we're charting with a literal chart, like bars and and numbers and stuff. We're charting these different proven biomarkers of fertility and infertility throughout our natural ovulation and menstrual cycle. And these two big ones that we're looking for are cervical mucus and basal temperature. Cervical mucus tells us when our fertility starts and stops for the cycle because, spoiler alert, we're not fertile, throughout the entire cycle. Really, we're only fertile for a very short window of time. And so cervical mucus lets us know that. And then our basal temperature, it has a very distinct pattern. It goes from low and then it shoots up to much higher the rest of the cycle after ovulation has taken place. And so basal temperature helps us to really be certain and to confirm when ovulation has passed us by. So that, number one, we're just identifying this for health reasons, because regular ovulation is a vital sign of health, as people who ovulate and menstruate. And also we're using this for really effective natural birth control. So there's rules and guidelines that go in. There's different methods that have been created for people with different needs and goals. And this can be really highly effective as an alternative for people who may not want to use hormonal birth control or devices for whatever reason. There's tons of reasons why people, might not want to use those, why they might not be the best fit for lots of people. And so FAM, or the fertility awareness method, really comes in and it really shines as a great alternative that's, again, effective and natural for people who just don't want to really go the other route for whatever reason.
Yeah. One of the big things that I remember learning about the female hormonal cycle is that we always think like your period is the main event. Like, did I bleed or did I not bleed? But like your period has nothing to do with it. Our body's main goal is to ovulate and produce babies. Even if like you're actively trying not to conceive, we have to start to accept the knowledge of like, my body just wants to make a baby. And if we think of it that way, understanding all the other symptoms and like starting to recreate a relationship to your bleed is getting to create a relationship to your pelvis and all the things, especially all the symptoms that a lot of women go through, whether it's PMS, hormonal symptoms, acne, things like that, to understand their body and to really accept and like move with their body was a huge thing for me in my journey of working with my cycle and understanding my hormones. And even just on a basic level, it's something that I teach my students now, whether we're doing pelvic care, just understanding like, here's how your body naturally wants to flow and how can we work with it instead of against it and think that, my pelvis and my period is out to get me. And really understanding that it's such an important part of understanding your own health and what's going on in your whole system versus just like your reproductive system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's often in our culture this fight that we have, this like vendetta that we have for some reason with our cycles, because whether or not we actually experience like discomfort or pain through our cycles, which by the way, that's a sign that something may be off and needs to get treated, because we shouldn't be experiencing pain throughout the cycle. But it's just, pain is so normalized and people treat it as if, oh, well, that's just part of like being a woman, or that's just part of having a period, like you just suck it up and deal with it. I was talking with someone literally yesterday who was expressing that and saying, oh, just, suck it up and that's just how it is. And it doesn't have to be. It really does not have to be. People do not have to suffer. And they can really cultivate a really deep relationship of body literacy and kindness and self-compassion with their body and with their cycle. And like you said, I think that for a lot of people, just learning about the natural physiology of the body, it kind of allows us to approach it maybe from more of like a scientific standpoint, and we can then say, okay, and yes, there absolutely is many emotional ways to connect with our bodies and our cycle. But I think for a lot of people, it's like by being able to sort of approach their cycle from a scientific standpoint,
Yeah.
they realize like, okay, this is not, it's not just me. It's not just happening to me. This is a really common experience. And, you know, here's the physiology of how this works for people who ovulate and menstruate. And like, it just helps to kind of release maybe some of the tension that we can hold, you know,
Yeah.
with ourselves. And it really can be really empowering because once we're able to let that go and open up to, yeah, the science and the physiology of how it works, we can tune into that and then use it to our advantage, use it as a strength, and just understand why our bodies may react in a certain way or why our bodies may have a propensity to do a certain thing. And that for so many people is just liberating because they feel like, okay, now I can just keep an eye on this and flow with this. And instead of like, you know, having like a stranglehold grip to control it, you know.
Exactly.
And it's a very different approach from what we're usually taught in our culture. But at the same time, it can be so incredibly valuable for people and life changing.
Yeah, for me, I remember because I actually took Megan's course, and that's how I met Megan. And like, I had already been reading the book, like Taking Charge of Your Fertility, and trying to do it by myself. But really,
Mm-hmm.
you know, even as someone who works in women's health and is very aware of the body, I work manually with pelvises. It was
Mm-hmm.
that thing of I still had this nagging voice as I took out my hormonal birth control. I had a hormonal
Mm-hmm.
IUD for many years. That like staring at a penis could get me pregnant. Like I knew it
Yeah.
wasn't true. But I was like, I don't feel safe with this method because
Right.
I don't know my own body cycle, even if I knew what was going on. And so your course, one of the things that I found, like the 3 moments that like made me burst into tears with like joy of understanding was like had a lot to do with post ovulation and
Mm-hmm.
understanding what happens post ovulation, the shame we carry. I think many women carry about being crazy,
Mm-hmm.
PMS, and like our
Right.
demonic selves that come out of understanding that what progesterone does and that raising of the body temperature and why I can eat 4 smothered burritos and still be
Yes.
hungry, like 2 days before my bleed. And
Yeah.
I remember showing, I did a little bit of it with my husband, and there's a chart in your course where you you show the change of the female hormones over a month,
Mm-hmm.
and then you show the change of the male hormones, and it's like basically
Mm-hmm.
a flat line for the men and like
Yeah.
this just spiky bipolar looking chart for the women. I'm like, this
Right.
is why you think I'm crazy. It's like my brain goes through this every single month.
Mm-hmm.
And there's days
Right.
where I'll wake up being a very nice, kind wife. And by the end of the day, because my cycle has shifted, will feel like a completely different person. And
Mm-hmm.
think for me, just even seeing it on paper, and then living with it as I started really charting my cycle, and
Right.
that was so empowering and understanding like I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Understanding the difference between I'm having a really hard emotional day and it feels like this is like a hormonal thing in my body. I
Mm-hmm.
started to be able to notice like, hey, this doesn't feel like, this feels like fatigue. It feels like, you know, something outside of myself. And that for
Mm-hmm.
me was huge in changing the way that I approached my mental health, the way that I approached, the way that my body cycles, the way that me and my body became a partnership in
Mm-hmm.
understanding what was going on, and all the weird things that happen in your chart, because no chart is the same.
Right.
Even if you had consistent charts for 3 months, there's going to be a month in there where weird shit happens and you have no
Mm-hmm.
idea why. And then I usually box you being like, hey, hey, Megan. So like, I think everything's fine, but will you tell me I'm not crazy with this weird thing happening in my chart? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's for me like such an important part of the work you offer, and women starting to understand, even if they don't want to use this as natural birth control or as a
Mm-hmm.
way to start looking at their fertility, is it's so important to understand just the natural rhythms of the body so that you can start
Right.
to understand how it affects every other part of your life, because it does affect every other part of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so glad you just shared so much like really deep insight that it takes people a long time to kind of get to. So thank you for doing that. If there's one thing I want people to kind of take away from the course, it is that no cycle is exactly the same as others. Even, like you said, even if you've had, you know, clockwork cycles your whole life or whatever, the fact is, at some point in your life, something's going to happen where either there's a stressor or just your body is just a little bit different that cycle or whatever. There's going to be a point in each person's life where our cycles are going to change a little bit, and that's okay. And yeah, like you said, so what's interesting is people like with male hormones, they actually do have cycles, but they're like within a 24-hour period as opposed to like a whole entire menstrual cycle, which is typically maybe like 24, 36 days, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. So it's interesting because, like, yeah, when you zoom out to like a month or so, those little tiny cycles, they do end up looking like a little flat line compared to people who ovulate when we have ovulation, you know, about mid-cycle, or again, whenever it happens for that cycle, sometimes earlier, sometimes a little bit later. These really rapid, big hormonal shifts take place, and our hormones control like everything that happens in our body. Hormones are chemical messengers that come from the brain. They can be produced also by the ovaries, and they're sending messages to different tissues in the body, telling them to do different jobs at different times. And so when we talk about our hormones, I think sometimes people they maybe have the wrong idea and they just say, oh, you're just hormonal. And, you know, they pass it off as if it's something that people, I don't know, are just totally out of control in regards to. And the fact is, yes, our hormones influence us. They influence our bodies in a really big way. But at the same time, like we said, we can then, you know, observe that and learn to live in tandem with that and in partnership and listen to the body. And for example, if we are experiencing PMS symptoms or whatever severe or even mild symptom that can come up at different points in the cycle, that's a signal from the cycle, from the body, that something may be a little bit off and maybe in need of treatment. For something like PMS, there's lots of different ways to approach that. Essentially with PMS, one thing that can be happening is there's an imbalance of progesterone. For a lot of people, their progesterone may be low, and that can affect them for several days before menstruation kicks in, like you said, at the end of the luteal phase, and in a big way. And so if that's happening for people, if they're experiencing things like really interruptions in sleep, acne, significant mood changes or mood swings, pain with menstruation or leading up to menstruation. These are also like breast tenderness, breast soreness. These are all signs of PMS, and it means that something is a bit off in the body, and we need to listen and do what we can to support the body, because again, we don't have to suffer. There's lots of different natural approaches that people can incorporate. Some of them are like super simple and really effective. For example, I have lots of clients who experience significant cramps during menstruation. Something as simple as drinking raspberry leaf tea in a therapeutic dose, like 1 tablespoon per cup, leading up to menstruation, during menstruation, a little bit after menstruation. That has made a huge difference for so many people. And every time it always feels so funny to me, because every time I recommend it to people, I'm like, oh yeah, like, okay, there's this tea, and part of me is like, a tea, Megan? You're gonna recommend a tea to someone? But then a month later they come back and they're like, oh my god, I have never had a period without any cramps and I feel great. And I'm like, okay, like, I guess the tea worked.
I feel
and
the same way.
it's amazing.
It's amazing. I do it with clients when we're doing yoni egg practices, and you know, I really approach the yoni egg as it can be a spiritual tool, but that's not why I offer it. Is it offers pelvic massage, so you increase circulation, and if you do that on a regular basis for anywhere between 1 month or 2 cycles, you'll see a huge difference, because there's less congestion, there's more circulation, those hormones can start to be processed through the body. And I still think, like, putting a crystal in your vagina, telling someone to do that sometimes feels very against, like, I grew up with doctors and lawyers,
Yeah.
and like very anti like Western medicine, but it does make a difference understanding that, you know, plant medicine and manual work in the pelvis can hugely shift PMS symptoms because, you know, we're told that they're normal, but they're common. They're not normal. Is one big thing about that.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. And just because they're common, right? It's like it pervades the culture. People think, okay, it's common. It just happens to everyone. I just have to deal with it. And unfortunately, a lot of like doctors don't see it as much of a red flag either. They continue to normalize it too. Or if there is an issue, then they just prescribe birth control, which isn't actually treating any of the hormonal imbalances or nutrient deficiencies that may be influencing or causing PMS, or like you said, muscle tension in the pelvis. It's not treating any of these things. It's really slapping a big band-aid on the issue and crossing our fingers and hoping that it goes away later. When with fertility awareness, by actively by actively charting these different things, it allows us to be more proactive in terms of our health because we can really easily identify on the chart what's going on, or at least have significant clues that we can then take to our doctor and show them and say, hey, look, here's the evidence. I've charted this information. Here's the evidence across these different cycle days. Here's exactly what I was experiencing. I really want to talk about this. This is important to me in my life and my well-being. What can we do here in terms of treating this and being proactive so that I can live, throughout my cycle and not be dealing with this? And it's definitely possible. It just takes kind of taking those first steps to listen to the body and to understand it. And if there's one thing I hope that people can take away from this live, it's not necessarily that like, okay, everyone who's listening, tomorrow you have to go out and start fertility awareness charting. Not necessarily. You might, which is great, or maybe you might not, and that's okay too. But I hope that people can take away from this the idea that listening to our bodies and responding to that, to those signs, is really important. So whether or not you actually go away from this and you start to chart, my hope is that maybe if not charting, you'll at least keep some notes about your cycle. At least keep an eye on your cycle. Maybe jot some symptoms down if you're experiencing them and the date that they took place. Just starting to note this information and keep track of it is kind of the first step in being able to actually identify what's going on and to move forward with treatment. Another thing I want to add, just super quick, especially in regards to PMS, is stress management. Because one of the biggest reasons for PMS is low progesterone. And the reason why many people can have low progesterone is a lot of environmental stress or stress in their day-to-day lives that isn't being managed. The higher stress we have, the more of the hormone cortisol that we have in the body. Cortisol is a great hormone. There's nothing wrong with cortisol, but when it's chronically really high, we tend to become, our bodies become a bit less sensitive to it, and it just creates this imbalance. Progesterone and cortisol, they both use the same building blocks in the body, and so when cortisol is kind of taking over those building blocks, progesterone doesn't have many resources to go off of to, be creating its healthy levels of progesterone, and so then we can have low progesterone. So my other hope is that people can also, start to address those stressors, because yes, sometimes PMS, the underlying causes are nutrient deficiencies or hormonal issues, but it's like, okay, what's behind that? What's the next layer down from that? What's going on with our stress management? Are we, being proactive with that? Maybe through therapy or journaling or spending time in nature or meditating each day. And I know sometimes that can sound like a lot, but really it's the self-care that we're looking for, to be able to naturally manage our stress. And by doing that, we're creating, a lot more stability in our lives, a lot more boundaries, and with ourselves and others, which then can help us to feel safer and lower stress overall. So there's a lot that goes into it that kind of wraps all together, and it's not as simple as like, oh, just pop this supplement. We're looking for different ways that we can really support the body. So that's the end of my ramble.
No, I love that. One of the things that I noticed that my favorite fam educators all have is they have really good boundaries. And I think as women, especially, or we have a tendency to always give. I think there's a lot in our culture, just we live in this culture where it's our jobs to be the caregivers. And what I love about many women on this journey doing fertility awareness methods, and especially fam educators, have amazing boundaries. I love your boundaries for Voxers is like, you're available 4 days a week, and if you can get to it, and your weekends, even on your Instagram, you're like, hey, you'll see pictures of my life, but I'm not responding to these things. There's a couple other fam educators out there too, fertility charting, who have amazing boundaries. And I think that's so important. And I know my boundaries have increased from working with the pelvis and even working with fertility awareness methods, because you become so empowered in understanding your body, understanding that post-ovulation, I need higher calories and rest. The nutrition part of your course was really powerful for me in understanding, okay, my temperature has risen. I've confirmed ovulation. This is why I'm craving like sugary foods and fat foods. How can I change that into actually meeting my body's needs instead of like trying to fill this void that I can't figure out what it wants? And like slowing down listening.
And we can even touch upon that for a second if anyone's curious. So the reason why this happens, and it's literally happening because there is a physical change in the body, it's because when we have higher sustained levels of progesterone after ovulation, progesterone literally creates a thermogenic effect in the body, meaning it literally heats up the body a little bit. The body is burning a bit more fuel just to go about its daily life. And so in the luteal phase, we literally require a certain amount of more calories each day just to simply maintain our normal day-to-day function. So it's not something, like you said, you're not imagining it if you're hungrier before your period. You are. Then that's normal because you're probably in your luteal phase. And so we can again approach that with that knowledge and maybe say to ourselves, okay, how can I maybe do some meal prepping for this week so that I'll have ample food to draw from, and I can just head to the fridge, I don't know, grab some chicken or steak or fish or whatever, maybe a salad, maybe some cheese, some dark chocolate, and just like pile all the food. You know how I love food.
I love it.
Just pile it all on the plate and like enjoy that, because food, it's not just about calories and like different nutrients. Food is also it's a pleasure. It's an experience. And in this life, we get to enjoy that, and that's okay. And so yeah, I just love that you brought that up, because I feel like the nutrition side of things, it doesn't always get the love it deserves, and I love when people recognize that and they incorporate it into their cyclical living. It's great.
Yeah, and I think it's really important too for, I have women who come to me for some of my programs, not only just the physical holistic pelvic care, but also my coaching program where one of the weeks we talk about, very 101, not as in depth as your charting. We don't talk about charting, but we talk about the cycles, the seasons of the female menstrual cycle, and how that happens to affect your fatigue and how active you are and what your needs are. And, the idea that especially post-ovulation with that progesterone and the raise in basal temperature is that, it's harder to regulate blood sugar. And so that is one of the things too, is like, yeah, you might feel great like 3 or 4 days post-ovulation, but if you're not actively trying to feed the gas tank, you're going to have those crashes. You're going to have more of those cravings. You're going to have more of that dysregulation with weight, with emotions, all the other things that kind of pile up. And how can we, by being aware of what's going on in your body, start to that preventative care on all levels? And I think what's so important too is that, FAM is not just about fertility awareness method. I don't think that, it's a great birth control tool. It has very high efficiencies, which I'd love you to talk about in a moment, and understanding your body, but it's also about unwinding all the shame we carry. I think something really important is the idea of, if you're in partnership and sexually active, like you might feel more sexually awake or horny in the first part of your cycle because you're producing more estrogen, your tissues are more lubricated. There's a desire to make a baby. If we think about, again, like your body wants to make a baby, like unfortunately your brain has no your spiritual brain has no control over it, but your your biological brain wants to make a baby. It's going to make you want to have intercourse. It's going to make that idea that you want to be together. And post ovulation, there's no egg, there's no chance for that. It's going to shut down that libido, and it's okay to not be this fully deep sexual person like post ovulation. Your body doesn't want to I forget who posted it, one of that your body doesn't want to have foreign entities inside of it when it thinks it might be producing a baby. That raising of the temperature is creating an incubator so that if fertilization happened, a baby can happen. And it's like, no baby, like baby doesn't want no more sperm, so like let's not have sex, like let's just cuddle and nest. One of the most fucked up but really kind of like really cool media manipulations, I don't know if you read the article, it came out like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, about natural cycles, when they started selling people's charting information to
I don't think I heard about this. Tell me more.
So Natural Cycles is a fertility tracking app, and apps are great to help you because we all use our phones, though they can't predict all your things, but we'll get into that in maybe a minute. But they were selling to advertisers people's data because we didn't have no data laws, and they were noticing that people who were charting pre-ovulation, they would start to advertise to them, lingerie, sexy things, things to make you feel more empowered, more sensual, more in your womanhood, things to attract a mate. Post-ovulation, they'd send you cat clothes and like nesting things that make you really want to come internal and like nest and like come together and like all those little, home goods. And they were noticing that by making your ads go with your cycle, they could get people to buy more.
Wow. You have to send me this article because I really want to read this now.
Someone sent it to me. It must have been like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but like kind of Natural Cycles got busted for like research on like how we can effectively advertise to women is by using their cycles against them.
Right. Oh my gosh. The advertisers would argue that they're just syncing the cycles with the advertising. So they're really using it from a standpoint of cycle syncing, so it's fine. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's crazy, but also not surprising at all, because a lot of apps that track cycle data, a lot of them are free apps, and then they sell people's data. And I mean, for a lot of different apps, that's just kind of how it works, unfortunately. That's one reason why I'll do a shout out to the Read Your Body app. They don't do that. They have really great, they have a great privacy policy. And so they're a great app for people who want to chart without worrying about their data being sold like that. Yeah, that is really interesting. Oh my gosh. My mind is blanking right now. I wanted to follow up with something else. So sorry. Where did we leave off? Tell me if you remember.
I was having the same thing of like, I was like, we'll get to this in a moment, and like I don't remember what it was anymore.
It was oh no, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Go.
Okay, I was gonna say, in regards to sexuality and sensuality, throughout the cycle, yeah, you nailed it. Everything that you mentioned is it's definitely true. With estrogen, like you said, we naturally have more of an inclination, because evolutionarily the body is kind of urging us to get pregnant, and so we're often more turned on during that phase of our cycle. And I think I was just going to kind of add to that for lots of people, charting their cycle can really help to identify their sensuality and their how they're expressing their sexuality with themselves or with their partner. And it's really interesting. I found for me, at least, I can speak from my own experience. For me, prior to using FAM, just like you said, it's like, if you like look at a penis or like touch a penis, it's like terrifying, and you might get pregnant or something. And I had a similar experience. Like, prior to learning the information that I learned with FAM about the body, I thought I was fertile all the time. I thought I could get pregnant all the time. I really didn't know anything about how any of that actually worked. And so I would have these like panic attacks and I would like be really terrified. Even like the idea of having like penetrative sex to me was like, no, like that's not happening. Like, you know, we'll do everything else and do different things. And like that was in a weird way, fine because, you know, we learn to communicate and trust and express sexuality in other different ways. But then there was just this innate fear that I had constantly because of the way I was raised and taught about sex, or maybe the lack of information about it, I should say. And when I learned about fertility awareness, when you learn about how you're only fertile for a very short time in a cycle, and I think this was the thing that we were going to touch upon later, maybe FAM versus the rhythm method, which we can get to in a sec. But when you learn about that, it's kind of like, okay, cool. And I feel like people, it can take a while to actually internalize that and to really feel that in your bones and know that as a fact. You can kind of read it on a piece of paper and be like, okay. But it takes a while of using the method and literally having unprotected sex in your infertile times and trusting and understanding why you're still on unsafe days and you know you likely won't get pregnant. It takes a while of actually practicing the method and doing it day to day before you really feel that in your bones and I think really accept that. And it's tough for people sometimes because they have this hesitancy. We have these ingrained fears. And I think that for a lot of people, FAM can really help to unpack that because it releases the fear by replacing them with like actual science and actual facts about the physiology of the body, which can be incredibly empowering. And then people can learn and understand, again, how to flow with their cycle in regards to their sexuality. For example, myself, I've been noticing lately, especially now that I live with my husband, because we've been together for almost 9 years now, but we've only lived together for the past year or so. And I'm finally really like recognizing the stark reality of how, for me, in my cycle, usually during my period, I kind of just naturally don't feel as turned on. I kind of just naturally take a little bit of a break. And then during my follicular phase or my ovulatory phase, when the estrogen is higher, I'm a lot more into like non-PIV sex, and I love that. And then in my luteal phase, then we're trying to prioritize more PIV sex. But I was just realizing like, oh, this is like kind of a cycle that I go through each cycle in terms of my sensuality and how I'm expressing that. And it didn't really hit me until like a few weeks ago, and I was saying to him, I was like, oh my gosh, like even my expression of sexuality, like that is also cyclical. And I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, but it was really interesting because I realized, yeah, just again, it's just another far-reaching and powerful way that our hormones influence, you know, our bodies and our lives. So it was just a really interesting thing to kind of take note of. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll like jump off of that too and just share a little bit about my story with my sexuality and being on the fertility awareness method. Is that, you know, what you said is like it takes a long time for it to really ingrain, and it's been almost 2 years now that like I haven't had hormonal birth control. And I mean, it took us, because we are actively trying not to conceive at the moment, so we're using it as birth control. You know, it took about 4 or 5 months to feel comfortable post ovulation, following all the rules. I'd always had a day or two, like I like knew, and I confirmed with you, like I definitely ovulated. Everything was like, this is like a perfect, and I had like tons of perfect like picture book cycles, and I was like, I'm gonna wait an extra day or two, even though I know that I am not fertile whatsoever. And then, you know, slowly after doing that for a little while and noticing like, hey, I'm not pregnant, it's like science or something, like would start to like actually follow more the FAM rules, would be like, okay, like I actually needed to wait 4 days, not 7 days, and like have like a day and a half of unprotected sex. And slowly, and it's been almost 2 years now, like I'm now still notice that I feel comfortable in the beginning part of my cycle. So after I've bled, or like the end of my period where I can look for cervical mucus, to start to have unprotected sex, PNV sex, penis and vagina, for those who don't know, at the beginning of my cycle because it just felt so scary. It was like a confirmed ovulation, like that feels safe until I bleed,
Mm-hmm.
but the other part didn't feel safe. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
knowing this work for, you know, 2 years now, knowing my cycle, knowing how my sexuality shifts of like, I
Mm-hmm.
know when I'm starting to really develop estrogenic mucus
Mm-hmm.
because my desire is there. Like I can like feel it. I like, for me, I don't have a lot of cervical mucus in most of my
Mm-hmm.
cycles. It's partially, my theory is that it's because I live in a very dry place and I don't drink enough water during the day on most
Mm-hmm.
days. And like
Mm-hmm.
that affects a lot of parts of my life that I try to
Yeah.
work with. But you know, I usually have 1 or 2 days of that really, really sticky, very fertile mucus. And
Mm-hmm.
I know how it feels because I feel like heated. I feel that turn on a lot more. I'm like, I'm curious if my mucus will look like the way that I think it will look too and my mucus
Right.
changes. And so noticing that in my cycle and noticing post ovulation, though I might have turn on, that it takes more time. I need
Yeah.
more of the emotional connection to stay
Mm-hmm.
in my body. Like, and that
Yes.
for me was huge in understanding like, I can't do a quickie post ovulation. Like that just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work for me. And
Right.
how do we kind of work with that together of like whether it's, you know, more communication is needed post ovulation because my
Mm-hmm.
body is not actively trying to conceive a baby right now, and so it's not
Yeah.
working with me. I have to kind of work with it. And
Yes.
that was huge in unwinding the shame I had around my sexuality as someone who teaches this work and understands this work, but then to fully live it in your body is a totally different story. And I share that with clients a lot, is like it changes all the time by
Yeah.
stressors, by what's going on in your body. And you know, teachers and experts, we all also are on this path because we're learning it too. We're learning it
Mm-hmm.
through our own experience every day of how does this affect me? And that makes me really good teachers because I bring that to my clients. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just as human as you are in this. And just because I know all this information does not mean that the ingrained shame and thoughts that have happened in my life from being a survivor of sexual assault, from
Mm-hmm.
living in patriarchy, like
Mm-hmm.
aren't there too. And I'm not always working with them. Like some days are easier than others. And some days I'm still terrified to get pregnant, even though I know I've ovulated and there's no way scientifically that I could get pregnant. It's, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure, I don't know if this happened to you as a teenager, but like I remember thinking before I was even sexually active, like my period's late, maybe I'm pregnant. And
I
like
know.
those, those things
Yeah.
of like, you know, even though you know better, like there's just like
Yeah.
this like um, deep ingrainment of looking at a penis will get you pregnant. You know, that's what sex
Yeah.
ed was like. It's abstinence. For most people, it's don't have
Right.
sex or you'll get an STD or you'll get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And like so
Right.
much of that is in our bodies and in ourselves. And understanding the fertility awareness methods are a really great way to start to unwind that and start to feel safe in your body, feel safe in your
Mm-hmm.
sexuality again. And for me, that is like the most juicy part of this is that safety you can feel and understanding your body, because most of us don't feel safe in our bodies.
Yes. Oh my God. Everything you shared was just so incredible. Um, the yeah, I'm kind of like processing a little bit still. It was awesome. The ways that we okay, so one thing okay that you mentioned like response to desire, our body's response to kind of like sexual input, and like you mentioned during the follicular phase around ovulation, it's a lot easier to be spontaneous, to be turned on like that, to maybe orgasm faster, or perhaps more intensely. Whereas during the luteal phase, yeah, for a bunch of reasons, a lot of people experience that, where it's just a kind of a shift in desire, and response. And as you were sharing your experience, I thought of something that, yeah, that also happened to me a couple of years ago, where I started to really notice that too. And what I did was I literally wrote down on a piece of paper. It was part of my little like self-care contract that I wrote with myself, and I had it on the wall. And it was kind of divided by the different phases of the cycle in general. So it said like, okay, here's my self-care during menstruation, and then a couple ideas for how to do that. So that when I was in the moment and in my different cycle phases, I could just glance at the wall and say, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I'll do that today. That's a good idea. And then during the follicular phase, here was my self-care. And then the luteal phase, I specifically wrote down as part of my self-care to communicate to my partner that I really wanted to prioritize a different type of sex during the luteal phase versus the follicular phase. And I think in our culture, like you said, there's so much fear that's ingrained, even around the idea of getting pregnant or not, let alone having those even deeper conversations and emotionally connecting with our partners and creating a space of emotional safety.
Yeah.
In a context of emotional safety in which to have those sexual experiences with them and share that with them if we choose. And I literally wrote it down and I was like, okay, here's my kind of mental note or my mental prompt each cycle to communicate to my partner what my needs are. And fertility awareness really taught me that. And I mean, with my partner, yes, I was always doing that to a certain degree. And it was always great. But fertility awareness taught me to even take it a step further, and to really go deeper and have those conversations with my partner and also start to talk about it with clients and my community and share different prompts and ideas for ways that they can do that with their partners or with themselves too. And so just like off the top of my head, a couple of good resources that people can look into in regards to this. There's an Instagram account called Modern Intimacy, and they cover this unique perspective, I think, on sexuality because it really prioritizes like trauma-informed communication about sex so that spaces of emotional safety and connection can be created to live in more positive and better sexual experiences. So I love Modern Intimacy on Instagram. Also, the Gottman Institute. That's an Instagram page and obviously a whole entire institute where it's evidence-based research about kind of strategies and approaches that work in relationships and have been studied across decades of time, and they're proven to work. So that page just has tons of information about how to connect emotionally, and they do touch upon sexuality at times, so I love that. And then also there's one called A Sex Journal on Instagram as well, and obviously they sell journals for people's sex lives. And so this is a journal that you can complete with your partner, and there's spaces for your input, your partner's input, and then some prompts to then talk about those things with your partner. And I don't know about you, but during the pandemic, when stress, I mean, it's still the pandemic still,
Right.
but when stressors were like really high and really intense, for a lot of people, there was kind of like a joke of like, oh, everyone's home, they're all having sex, I bet there's gonna be so many babies born. And it's like, okay, maybe, but I think for a lot of people it wasn't that. For a lot of people there was intense trauma in the past year that they're still processing and dealing with, incredibly high stress the past year when we were all facing this kind of like nameless fear, and that has a crazy impact on people's sex lives because oftentimes sex is like the first thing to go when we're really stressed out.
Yeah.
And so the sex journal, I think, is just an incredible tool to really bring awareness to our sexuality and how we're doing that with our partner, and by ourselves. And yeah, I just big shout out to them because I think that there just needs to be more communication about it. People can express their needs and their desires, and I think that FAM is a great way to kind of get started with that. And then these other tools are incredible to help with that journey as it continues.
Totally. I love that. Before we have to go, I would love for you to just take a moment and talk the difference between FAM, so fertility awareness methods,
Yes.
and the rhythm method, because I think a lot of people get them confused. I mean, anyone who's ever done any sort of FAM thing knows that there's a lot of shame out there of like, oh, like, you're going to get pregnant with that. Will you talk a little bit of the statistics of the efficacy of FAM, as well as what is the rhythm method and what is FAM and like the difference. We know we talked about the symptothermal stuff, but just give kind of like maybe like a quick list of like most common misunderstandings around fertility charting.
Great question, and thank you, because we probably should have talked about this first, but it's fine. It's totally fine. We saved the best for last. So with FAM, basically, fertility awareness is like a big umbrella that actually includes a bunch of different methods. You have cervical mucus based methods. You have the Billings ovulation method, cretin, Justice, FEM. Those really focus on cervical mucus. You have others, symptothermal methods that are like strict symptothermal methods, like Sensiplan. Justice is also kind of a symptothermal. But basically, these different words and method names and stuff, it just means that they're basically just different approaches to the same thing. They're all developed from the same science and base of science. And by the way, hormonal birth control is also developed from the same root of science, except hormonal birth control seeks to suppress ovulation, whereas fertility awareness seeks to identify ovulation and then work with it. And it's not interrupting the cycle at all. So basically these methods, they look at different ways to combine cervical mucus, basal temperature, LH testing, progesterone testing, the cervix position, and they're kind of combining these different biomarkers in different ways, slightly different ways. I think at the core, a lot of fertility awareness-based methods are like ultimately very similar, but they can differ slightly in best practices and in the slight rules and guidelines that are used. And so anyway, basically, a symptothermal method, it can be up to 99.6% effective. Now, the key that I always stress to people is this is when it's learned with a certified educator. So in order to get that really high efficacy of over 99% effective for natural birth control, it's key to work with a certified educator. We simply do not have stats that are taken from self-teaching alone, like self-teaching from a book, or self-teaching from a book, or a Facebook group, or websites, or researching all these different things online. We don't have stats from that. We don't have stats from people who are like cycle coaches who aren't certified in a method teaching like a 2-hour workshop about it. And oh gosh, that's like a whole nother rant to go on. People trying to teach an entire method in 2 hours. It's not going to happen. And so it's important, I think, for people to understand that going in. It is possible to self-teach, but again, it's just really easy when self-teaching to accidentally miss stuff and to not know that you're missing it. And so I just encourage that anyone who wants to use this method, learn with an educator. There's so many different educators, so many different languages, so many different like payment levels and stuff. Lots of people have sliding scale options, payment plan options, and stuff like that. So there's someone out there for you. If you want to learn this method, you can just go look.
Yes, I'm going to pause you. And if you're looking for someone, Megan is fucking amazing. Her course is so intuitive. And like one of the things I love most about your course is she's like really actively there. Not only like there's a Facebook group where people you can ask your questions and kind of like we crowdsource like, is this normal? Mm-hmm. But like your one-to-one connection, which was I think so important, is being able to ask the stupid questions. And Megan will always give you like a long-winded, really in-depth, like she explains the same thing 7 times because I needed to hear it 7 times to really let it ingrain in my body. Mm-hmm. She is really amazing. So if you have the space, please check out her course. I just want to say that like there's other amazing teachers. I chose Megan specifically because of the few teachers I was following on Instagram and wanted to learn from. You happen to be in America and like we're in similar time zones. Mm-hmm. And that's really important. That was important to me at the time. But like you have an amazing course, and I just have to like shout that out first before we go into like what is the rhythm method, and then it's not FAM.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. That means the world because I'm always just so happy to hear when people enjoy it, when, you know, the info is really serving them. And yes, I absolutely love Voxer. I love to connect with people on Voxer. And yes, as you know, I tend to ramble a little bit and explain things, but only because, like, oftentimes, like you said, people need to hear the repetition sometimes for things to really sink in. And so I love doing it. I'm happy to do it.
And
So
what I love
thank
about
you
your
for that.
course, one more thing too, is that
Mm-hmm.
she'll update it and you get to, like, you know, since I took it 2 years ago, right when I think it started a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I've gone back in there to like refresh it on some things, like figure
Mm-hmm.
out, like I wanted to see like a chart or two to be able to share that with someone.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've noticed like, oh, like there's totally modules I haven't done yet, because you keep
Yeah.
updating it, the more you're educating yourself. And I think that's so important as an educator is, you know, as we self-teach and as we take our own courses and continue our trainings, like we update our courses for our clients. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
is like incredible. And I like love all the new things that are on your course since I first took it 2 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that too. It's like when the clients come in, basically we work together like forever into the future. And so people can get access to the new content as I add it in. And I'm always trying to do that. And then we can always reconnect down the line too if people have questions. So I love that because I think like anyone can learn this method, but it takes the right support, and having that like human relationship and connection can be really, really helpful with it. And just really, like you said, integrating it in. So I love that. Thank you so much.
I know.
Thank you. So let's talk about the differences between the rhythm method versus FAM. So the rhythm method, it's like a type of fertility awareness method. It's under the big umbrella, but it's one that really, to put it simply, the rhythm method is basically about predictions. You're using past cycle data to predict what's going to happen in future cycles. Now, sounds great, right? Sounds so easy. Yay. However, the rhythm method can't account for a pandemic. It can't account for a job loss, for moving, and it can't account for these just real life stressors that happen to people and that can really impact their cycles. So, like we said before, even for people who have like clockwork cycles, there's gonna come a time in your life, whether you like it or not. Sorry to be the bearer of real news, but it's like there's gonna come a time in your life when your body responds to the stressors in your environment. And for some people, that doesn't happen for a while, but for others, it's constantly happening, and they're working with their body. And so, with the rhythm method, another thing that people don't always know about it is that actually it does have certain parameters to it. Like, not everyone kind of fits into the parameters that the method was studied for. So, like, I believe with the rhythm method, you're supposed to have cycles that are regular, first off. They're regular and consistent in length before you even go into it. And also, I think they're supposed to be something like under 40 days or something. So there's also like a length of your cycles that you're supposed to have before you even go into it. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. And we often can see people with irregular cycles or very, very, very long cycles kind of just jumping into the rhythm method, having no idea that this method literally was not created to include those cycle parameters. And so it's very risky is what I'm trying to say. And if someone, is in a place where like they're fine with that lowered efficacy, they're fine with a potential unintended pregnancy, then cool, it can totally work for you if you're fine with that risk. But not everyone is fine with that. Lots of people really want or need to seriously avoid pregnancy for a host of reasons. And those reasons are valid and important. And so using something like fertility awareness, which is not about predicting things based on the past, it's about looking at the evidence in real time and asking myself, am I fertile today? Yes or no? And also based on what? Am I just waking up and saying, I just feel like I'm like infertile today. Okay. It's not about that. You're literally looking at your biomarkers. You go to the bathroom, you check your cervical mucus throughout the day. And based on that real-time daily information, you're then looking at your chart and interpreting it according to the rules of the method. And you're saying, okay, based on this, this, and this, I know the evidence in my body is telling me that yes, I'm infertile today. And so, unprotected sex would be safe. And when we practice fertility awareness, we should be able to get to a point of confidence and independence with the method where we are able to identify in our charts, okay, here's my peak day, here's my temperature shift, here's my cover line, and these are all marked correctly. I know why I'm marking these things. So it's more than just, again, looking at a calendar and going off of a vague general prediction like with the rhythm method, which has a much, much lower efficacy. With FAM, we're looking at these real-time biomarkers and we're going off the evidence of our body to make really informed choices and informed decisions about how we're going to express our sexuality for the day and for that different point in our cycle. So yeah, that's like the biggest difference in just the approach to how it works. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, the big thing too was noticing that with a lot of rhythm method is it uses your period as a biomarker, and that's not a biomarker. You know, it can work to like confirm, or like, what does your period actually serve for in that,
right,
in the method. But like the idea that I remember, I think it's in your course, like the idea that, you know, we say it's a 28-day cycle. Most women have 28-day cycles. But what that doesn't mean that you always ovulate on day 14. Some people ovulate on day, 12 and then have a longer luteal phase. Some people ovulate on day, 18 and then have a shorter luteal phase. And what that 28 days, how it can be shifted, can be still healthy cycles. But unless you are confirming ovulation versus, using your bleed as a way to, create what your time frame is, that doesn't really work for most bodies, because there can be so much difference. And that's why accidental pregnancies happen, is because, a lot of the charting apps use your bleeding as that biomarker that they use to chart whether or not you're fertile.
Right, absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up because, yes, even if you have the quote unquote regular cycles and you are within the parameters of when in general the rhythm method works, like you said, you can have a 28-day cycle. Sometimes someone's ovulating, like you said, on day 10 even. It can happen earlier. Sometimes they might ovulate later on day 20 and have a shorter luteal phase. There's simply, the thing is, with FAM, we can predict when we're gonna menstruate because we can kind of count down our luteal phase after ovulation. But we can't ever predict when ovulation is gonna happen. Even with like ultrasounds and going into the doctor each day, you can get like a pretty good idea of when it's gonna happen. Based on ultrasounds, based on your cervical mucus. These things can be a pretty good indication, but we can't ever say, even with fertility awareness charting, okay, I had some cervical mucus today, so that means 4 days from now I will ovulate. It's not that black and white, but it's, and honestly with FAM, you don't even need to know the exact day you ovulate. It's not even relevant to the efficacy of the method. It's really not. And so that whole idea of like, oh, I need to predict ovulation, it just is kind of, I think, it sets people up to fail, I think. It sets them up to be confused and to feel maybe even inadequate, like, oh no, I didn't ovulate by this day, my body's broken or something. And like, no, your body's not broken. It's just responding in real time to everything that's happening in your life. And if your body says, okay, I'm super stressed out right now, it's not a good time to get pregnant, I'm going to delay ovulation by like a week, and then we'll see how things feel next week. Your body can do that, and it's really not a conscious decision that you're making in any way. It's just your hormones responding in real time to everything that's happening to you as a human individual.
I know. One of the big things, I think my most irregular cycle, I think I've had since I started really charting. I had, I was coming off hormonal birth control. So like, I wasn't able to there's like a really large window I had of fertility because I wasn't able to like pinpoint and narrow my ovulation. But was when, after I got the COVID shot, and, I think this is kind of how the rumors that COVID shots are going to make you infertile, which is not true, was I got the Johnson & Johnson's, the one hit wonder. And I remember I was like kind of close to ovulation at that point. I had You know, I had my fertility, like my cervical mucus was all in the right, you know, kind of same kind of peaking. I just started having a positive LH test. So, which means you're kind of in that sometimes 48, 72 hour window of when you could theoretically ovulate. And, you know, my temperatures were looking good, and I got the shot. I got a fever for a day, and then I was fine. But then I remember that, like, I never had a temperature shift. And I was like, just waiting for it. I was like, does it, because I took my temperature at a weird time, and it just never happened. The cervical mucus stopped, as if, like, you know, similar to how my cycle worked for, you know, post ovulation, but I never had a temperature shift. So I still, even though I didn't want to, I wanted to ignore that. I like still considered myself, okay, I'm still fertile. And about a week, maybe 8 days later, I started to get cervical mucus again. And it just, you know, the cycle, it did its, you know, I don't want to say it's perfect, but my body was pretty cool. It just did, it just started over. It just, you know, did cervical mucus shift. I got another positive LH test, and then I had the temperature shift. And I had like I had like a 42-day cycle. I knew I wasn't pregnant. I was like, okay, something happened when I got sick right around ovulation from the shot. My body went into a cool immune response. Now now I can't get COVID, but like, you know, really listening to the method and like not wanting to go against like, hey, like everything but happens. And I think that is the big part of, you know, really using biomarkers and multiple biomarkers to track your cycle is trusting the science of it. My body was like, hey, like we didn't ovulate because in theory you were running away from a lion and like not going to get pregnant. So why would we waste an egg? And, you know, really understanding that, you know, 42-day cycle was hard because I could feel like a congestion of like my body wanted to ovulate. There's all these weird extra hormones happening. Like, my moods and stuff were definitely more extreme, but you know, my next cycle was totally normal. And really using that, I think, is really important in understanding that what makes it different than the rhythm method, which is just looking at timelines and past information, is that real-time information is so empowering in knowing that nothing is wrong with you, and even being able to understand like what's going on in my body, how can I look at my life right now to real-time make changes.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up because for a lot of people, myself included, with having the vaccine for COVID, and honestly, any vaccine can prompt the same type of response. It's not just the COVID one. But any vaccine, it's meant to start to stimulate an immune response. And that's part of like the long list of potential stressors that can impact people. Like we said, sometimes these big stressors can be a change in work, or moving to a different location, or traveling for 2 weeks, or there's a loss of a loved one or a pet or something. Sometimes they're these like big, huge events. Other times it's just a vaccine that's prompting an immune response. And then your body says, okay, well, I'm kind of stressed out right now because I'm trying to work on this immune thing to like keep myself alive and keep myself safe. Let's delay ovulation by a week or two, and then we'll revisit this when I don't have a fever, when I don't feel sick. And then it's really just the body working. It's the immune response and the cycle working in tandem to keep you safe, protected, and alive. The thing is, oftentimes when there's stressors, basically the body just, it shoots down reproduction to like the last priority. And it's like, I need to stay alive, I need to stay alert, I don't need to get pregnant right now, so let me just pause this and then we'll revisit later. So yeah, it's an excellent point, and one that I'm sure people can relate to because a lot of people experienced changes in their cycle parameters as a result of the vaccine. And again, it's not this like I knew, you know, going into this whole vaccine thing, I was like, yeah, people are probably going to have cycle irregularities because that's just what happens with the vaccines. I've known that for years, already charting with FAM from other vaccines and other research and knowledge from those past years. So it was no surprise to me to see this happening with people, and it was exactly what I expected. But yeah, seeing it actually in your cycle, personally, happening to you, it's like, oh, okay, so yeah, this is actually how it works. And yes, it is. And I think that's just the magic of FAM, because you see the evidence of that literally on the chart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Megan, I could talk to you forever about this. I want to respect your time. And before we go, tell us a little bit about how people can reach out to you, kind of a couple of your offerings, because I know besides your course, you have an amazing podcast and other different ways of really using, especially the free knowledge you offer, because so many educators offer free resources to really get a taste of this before someone's willing to like dive in and want to have an educator to really learn the methods. How can people get in touch with you, and what resources do you have for them?
Thank you. So people can get in touch with me if you go to my Instagram. The link in my bio is always the link to schedule a call with me to talk about the course. And so you can definitely head to my Instagram, look through my free content. I have posts, I have reels, I have Instagram guides to walk people through different topics. There's tons of free content. And if you like it, if you feel like we would mesh well together, you can definitely head to the link in bio and set up a call to meet with me to learn more about the course and see if it might be right for you. And then in addition to that, I also have, yes, the podcast. It's called Body Literacy Babes. I co-host it with Natalie from Fertility Awareness Project. And it's kind of geared both towards FAM educators who are certified. We cover lots of topics like specifically in that area, but it's also geared toward people who might be new to FAM or curious about it or wanting to learn more details. And we go into all types of discussions in there for a long time. So we talk about sex, we talk about basically kind of the topics that we cover today, just in a lot more depth and detail with some dedicated episodes to those topics. So head over and listen to that if you'd like. And then I also have a YouTube channel too. It's just Famtastic Fertility, and that's FAM, like fertility awareness method. And on that channel, I have a bunch of different videos. And the one that tends to, bring people in is the one about the cervical mucus project. And it has a picture of cervical mucus as the thumbnail. I think when people see that, they're like, what is this? Let me click on this. And I basically explain more about cervical mucus. I show people samples. And people seem to hop on that one. So if you're checking out my YouTube channel, definitely check out that one. But yeah, and then also people can just like DM me on Instagram if they want to chit chat about stuff. Like you said with boundaries, I can't offer any, charting advice or chart reviews or, things like that. They're specific to people's health situations unless they are a client of mine. And so I can't do that type of stuff in the DMs or the comments, but I'm happy to work with people personally, one-on-one, through the course. And I love doing that. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
I also have to do a shout out to your amazing second Instagram account, which is all about
Oh my
memes.
God.
Like it's like basically fertility awareness memes and Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
So if you're in this world a little bit, or you're curious about like some pretty great ways to connect and just laugh about how isolating it can feel to be doing natural birth control. That's an account to follow just to make sure you have a good cackle once a week. So we have to shout out to that one. I don't remember the exact.
It's called FAM-X LOTR. So it's like FAM-X Lord of the Rings.
I'll add a link to it too in like the bio.
Perfect.
Because it's totally worth it. Of like,
thank you.
I sometimes I just go there and I'll like rewatch the memes.
I know.
Because it's just something you need to feel like, okay, I'm not alone in this world of trying to figure it out. I've gone to like holistic doctors who they're like, so what kind of birth control are you on? I'm like, I'm not on birth control. I chart my cycle. And even they're like, so you're trying to conceive? I'm like, no. Like, I'm like actively trying not to conceive. And, they're not as quite judgmental as if it was like a male, like really allopathic medicine doctor.
Yeah.
But like still like they say holistic medicine. And they're like, okay, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah,
and like,
I know.
And there's a good meme about that too, of like talking to other people who are like, okay, well, I guess you're gonna get pregnant soon. See you in 9 months.
Yeah, I love that Instagram page. I swear, it's been so much fun. Just because, like, there's no education on it. It's just pretty much memes and like a quick caption. So it's very, on my part, kind of like low effort because I'm not having to type this huge paragraph with an explanation or anything. So it's just the purest, most ultra-specific memes about FAM and Lord of the Rings. So if you're a fan of either of those things, you'll probably like it, and you can head to FAM-X-LOTR to check it out.
I love that.
Thank you.
Megan, thank you so much for taking the time this morning and like coming to talk with me. I like love geeking out with you on this stuff and getting to getting to talk one-on-one and share some of this information to more people, because I think it's so important, the work you do. And I love the integrity of the way you offer it to the community. And I love highlighting it. Hopefully people will come looking to learn more, because your course is really incredible. And it has changed the way that I relate to my body. It's changed the way that I chart. And it's made me feel safe in my body and in my fertility, which I think is so huge.
Thank you. It was my honor. I absolutely loved talking with you. And yes, I agree. I could talk to you for like literally 6 more hours. But unfortunately, IGTV would cut us off, or Instagram Live or whatever. We'd be done.
Yeah.
But thank you. I absolutely loved it. And I'm sure we'll chat again very soon.
Yeah. And if anyone has questions, leave them in the comments here. Both Megan and I will try to get back to them and answer any questions that after you watch this, if you didn't get to be in the live, can answer any of your questions you have. So thank you so much, Megan. And I can't wait to keep talking with you maybe another time.
Absolutely, my friend. Okay. Have a good day.
You
Talk
too.
later.